Have you ever read a story so incredible that you had to keep checking the cover to make sure it wasn't fiction? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, based on Ben Macintyre's phenomenal book, The Spy and the Traitor. This isn't just a story, it's a real-life espionage thriller packed with so much tension and betrayal, you'll swear it was written for Hollywood. But it wasn't.
And this quote from a reader just nails it, right? It perfectly captures the feeling you get. The events we're about to walk through, they seem completely unbelievable, almost impossible, but every single bit of it, from the secret handoffs to the life-or-death gambles, actually happened.
And that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth does a high-ranking KGB colonel end up as the West's most valuable asset? We're going to unpack the incredible journey of Oleg Gordievsky, what drove him, how he was recruited, and how he made a pulse-pounding escape that literally changed the course of history.
But you know, to understand the traitor, you first have to understand the loyal man he was supposed to become. So our story really begins with the making of a perfect Soviet spy.
Oleg Gordievsky wasn't just in the system, he was born from it. You could say he was KGB royalty. His father was a dedicated officer, his older brother was too. He was brilliant, a star student at what was basically the Soviet Harvard. He was, for all intents and purposes, the perfect candidate, destined for a huge career serving the motherland.
Now, real quick, inside the KGB, you basically had two kinds of spies. First, there were the legals. They operated under diplomatic cover, as embassy staff or something. If they got caught, they'd just get kicked out of the country. But then you had the illegals. These were the deep cover agents, with totally fake identities, living completely off the grid in foreign countries. And if they got caught, well, there was no diplomatic immunity to save them.
So, what went wrong for the Soviets? How did this golden boy start to turn? It wasn't one big explosion, but more like a slow burn. It started in 1961, with the Berlin Wall going up. To him, that was just a profound, ugly injustice. Then fast forward to 1968. He's watching an absolute horror as Soviet tanks roll into Prague and just crush this beautiful, hopeful moment of reform. It was around then that he started hiding in his apartment, tuning into the BBC World Service, and hearing what he would later call the first faint scent of truth.
Okay, so you have a man who's secretly questioning his entire world. That's one thing. But turning him into an asset for the other side, well, that's a whole other level of dangerous. It was a process that began very, very carefully in Copenhagen.
While he was posted in Denmark, Gordievsky's quiet disillusionment didn't go completely unnoticed. British intelligence, MI6, flagged him as a potential recruit. But you can't just walk up and ask a KGB guy to be a spy, right? So it became this incredibly delicate dance, this pas de deux, to try and bring him in without setting off any alarms for him or, much worse, for the KGB.
And the way they did it, it's just wild. First, they actually used a Danish badminton champion as unwitting bait, hoping they could bond over a game. That didn't work. So then an MI6 officer starts spending months just making casual, friendly contact. But here's the masterstroke. They then went completely silent for 8 months. That long pause is what convinced Gordievsky it wasn't a trap. It gave him time to think, and it made him want it more. By the time they reached out again, he was all in.
And this right here, this tells you everything you need to know about the man. When he finally said yes, he had 3 conditions. 1, no assassination orders. 2, you can't secretly record our meetings. And 3, the most important one, absolutely no money. He wasn't in it for himself. He was a true believer, a man who had decided the Soviet system was a cancer, and he was going to risk his life to cut it out from the inside.
For years, Gordievsky lived this insane double life. He was rising up the KGB ladder, eventually becoming their top man in London, all while feeding priceless intelligence to MI6. But that tightrope he was walking was about to snap in the most terrifying way possible.
And here's the cruelest twist of all. Gordievsky wasn't outsmarted by some brilliant KGB counterspy, no. He was sold out. An American CIA analyst, a guy named Aldrich Ames, was deep in debt and started selling secrets to the Soviets for cash. And one of the biggest secrets he had to sell was the identity of Britain's top spy inside the KGB.
You've got to understand the terrifying disconnect here. On one side, in London, MI6 thinks his sudden summons back to Moscow might be for a big promotion. That was the cover story. But the reality in Moscow was a living nightmare.
He was being watched 24/7. His apartment had been tossed and bugged, and then, at a dacha outside the city, his own colleagues drugged him with a so-called truth serum and interrogated him for hours. After that interrogation, even though he hadn't cracked, his bosses knew. They knew something was deeply wrong. One of his superiors gave him this bone-chilling piece of advice, and Gordievsky knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't forgiveness, it was a suspended death sentence. He was a dead man walking.
So imagine this. You're trapped in Moscow. You're being watched constantly. And you know there's a bullet with your name on it. Gordievsky had one move left. A desperate Hail Mary escape plan that MI6 had cooked up years ago, just in case.
It was called Operation Pimlico. MI6 had this plan on the books, but it was so ridiculously complex, so full of things that could go wrong, that even Gordievsky had once said it was basically unworkable. But now, it was the only hope he had.
To kick the whole thing off, he had to perform this bizarre little street theater. At exactly 7:30 on a Tuesday night, stand on a specific corner holding a Safeway shopping bag. 10 minutes later, a guy from MI6 walks past holding a Harrods bag. The final confirmation? The guy makes eye contact and casually eats a Mars bar. It sounds absurd, almost comical, but this strange performance was the signal for the most important message of his life. Get me out of here, now.
The signal was sent, and incredibly, the signal was received. And just like that, the clock started ticking on one of the most daring escapes of the entire Cold War.
First, he had to shake the KGB surveillance team that was glued to him, using every trick in the spy book. Then, he jumps on an overnight train heading for Leningrad, but he gets off early at a little town near the Finnish border. There, in the middle of a forest, he meets two cars driven by MI6 agents and their wives. And for the final, most dangerous part of the trip, he was folded into the trunk of a Ford Sierra, ready to be smuggled across the border.
And just when you think this story can't get any more unbelievable, it does. The final go-ahead from Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was actually delayed because a guard was busy trying to fix the Queen Mother's VCR. No joke. And at the border crossing, to throw off the Soviet snifferdogs, the agents' wives used a baby's dirty diaper and a bag of cheese and onion chips, hoping the combined smell would be too much for the dogs. You just can't make this stuff up.
After hours cramped in the suffocating heat of that trunk, the car finally made it into Finland. The trunk pops open, and they pull Gordievsky out into the free air. And his very first words to his handler confirmed everything. He knew. He hadn't been outsmarted. He had been sold.
And for the MI16, the guys who risked it all to pull this off, well, you can just imagine the feeling. It was pure triumph. As one of them put it, they had stared right into the heart of the Soviet machine, and against all odds, they had won.
Gordievsky started a new life in the UK, celebrated as a hero. But that victory came with a terrible, terrible price. His wife and his two little girls, who knew absolutely nothing about his other life, were trapped back in the USSR. They became prisoners, pawns of the very state that he had betrayed.
And that really leaves us with this final, heavy question. Gordievsky's story is an amazing spy thriller, for sure, but it's also a powerful story about conviction. He followed his conscience, and by doing so, he might have helped stop a nuclear war. But it cost him everything: his country, his career, and his family. It really forces you to ask, in this world of secrets and massive, powerful systems, what is the real price you pay for doing what you think is right?